Using cost-volume-profit relationships to predict outcomes based upon change. Cost-volume-profit analysis can be used in powerful ways to predict net income when projecting possible changes based upon management's plans. Cost-volume-profit relationships can easily be seen in the contribution format income statement. The sales will be the same as sales as you would have in GAAP. However, we're going to break out costs and expenses based upon how they behave. Variable expenses will be accumulated together and will be deducted from sales in order to yield the contribution margin. The contribution margin is what is left over after variable expenses have been deducted in order to meet fixed expenses. From the contribution margin, we will deduct fixed expenses and yield net operating income. Why is it important to separate variable expenses from fixed expenses? That's because variable expenses will change in relationship to sales, and we can see a stable relationship of variable expenses as a ratio of sales. And also, because of that, we will also see a stable relationship of what's left over, the contribution margin, as a percentage or as a ratio of sales. However, fixed expenses don't change from volume to volume. In other words, if I sell 12,000, 1,000, or 100,000, my fixed expenses aren't expected to change. They will remain fixed no matter what my sales volume will be. We will look at sales minus variable expenses equals the contribution margin minus fixed expenses equal profit. We will look at it on a total dollar basis. We'll also look at it on a per unit basis. These $12,000 in sales represent 2,000 units sold at $6 per unit. Also, we will be able to see some ratio relationships that should remain constant if we properly identified variable expenses and fixed expenses. This is our original data. Now let's look at changes in units sold. Management projects 3,000 units will be sold. Presently we're selling 2,000 units. Now they project that they're going to sell 3,000 units. This is an increase of 1,000 units. What will be the effect on net income? The increase can be calculated in 3 different ways. I'll show you the first 2, but the third one is probably the preferable one as far as making a presentation to management or to double check the calculation in the first 2 methods. In the first method, we're going to multiply the increase in number of units, which is 1,000, times the contribution margin per unit. So in other words, the contribution margin per unit, which is $2.52, we're expecting the fact that we're selling these products for $6 per unit. Our variable expenses are $3.48 per unit. So it means immediately once I've sold a unit, $3.48 is no longer available to contribute to fixed expenses or to a profit. Therefore, multiplying the number of units that we expect to sell as far as an increase is concerned times the contribution margin per unit should tell us dollar-wise exactly how much is left to contribute towards the fixed expenses and towards the profit. We can also multiply the total dollar increase in units sold by the contribution margin ratio. So we expect to sell 1,000 more units. It's selling at $6 per unit. That means that our total sales will increase by $6,000. If we multiply that by the contribution margin percentage, this means that 42% of that $6,000 or $2,520 should be available to meet our fixed expenses or to contribute to our net profit. And we can also restate the contribution format income statement and compare it to the original data. So this is sales of 3,000 units times $6 per unit. This is sales of 3,000 units times $3.48 on a per unit basis for the variable expenses. That gives us a contribution margin of $7,560, from which we will deduct our fixed expenses, and this means that our profit is $3,560. At present, based upon 2,000 units, our profit is $1,040, which means that our profit went up by $2,520 by selling the additional 1,000 units. Now, let's look at proposed changes in fixed costs to increase sales. Management projects that 2,600 units will be sold, an increase of 600 units. If the advertising budget, a fixed cost, is increased by $1,000, what is the effect on net income? Will we make more money by selling the $600 more units by spending $1,000? These changes can be calculated by, number one, multiplying the increase in number of units times the contribution margin per unit. From this, we will subtract the increase in cost to see if we will make money from spending this $1,000. So we expect to sell 600 more units. We know our contribution margin per unit is $2.52. This 600 times $2.52 is $1,512, from which we will subtract the $1,000 that we spent in order to get this increase of 600 units, which means that we will make money of $512 based upon this projected spend of $1,000 on the advertising budget. Additionally, we can calculate it another way. We can look at 600 more units that will be sold times the $6 selling price, which means our total sales will go up by $3,600. We multiply that by 42%, which is the contribution margin, 42% of the sales. We expect 42% to remain after taking into consideration our variable expenses. 42% remain to contribute to profit and expenses. So this means that it'll be $1,512 will be what we will earn in additional net income, from which we will subtract the $1,000 that we spent, which means that we yielded, or we gained $512 rather, by spending the $1,000 and increasing our sales by $600. Again, we can take the new selling volume of 2,600 and multiply everything out on a percentage basis, and then we're going to add 1,000 to the 4,000 in fixed expenses to find out how much we were expecting to make if we increase our fixed expenses by $1,000 and we sell $600 more in units. So we can restate the contribution format income statement for this scenario. From that, we can look at what it would have been if we hadn't spent the additional $1,000 and our sales level remained the same. We can see the differences, and we can see that the increase is $512. So if you calculate it by 1 and 2, I would caution you to restate it as we did in scenario number 3 in order to check that you've gotten the correct calculation in 1 and 2. Now let's look at another scenario. We have a proposed change in variable cost to increase profits. So management can decrease variable cost to $3 per unit. At present, it's $3.48. See, $3.48, it was this. And so now they do believe that they can get that down to $3 per unit, which means that they will have a contribution margin of $3. So now our variable expenses are 50% as opposed to 58% of sales, and our contribution margin is 50% as opposed to 42%. So now how can we calculate how that change will affect us? The effects can be calculated various ways by looking at the changes on a per unit and the ratio basis. So we can multiply the decrease in variable cost. So a decrease in cost means that money at 48 cents per unit is now available for profit, times the number of units sold. So we're going to sell 2,000 units just like we have in the past. We're going to multiply that by the 48 cents that we're going to save, and now we're going to have an additional $960 available to us in net income. We can also multiply the total dollar sales, $12,000, based upon a level of unit sales per a quantity of $2,000 times the change in the variable cost ratio. So our variable cost ratio was 58%. Now it's 50%. That means that 8% of the $12,000 that we have in sales is now available for net income to be added to net income. That's still $960, a different way of calculating it. Additionally, we can restate the contribution format income statement and compare it to the original data. So we still have our sales both based upon 2,000 units sold. We have $12,000 in sales. We're going to subtract our new variable cost, which is 50%, or $3 per unit, from the sales, and that will give us a contribution margin of $6,000. The contribution margin formerly was $5,040 when we had $3.48 per unit. And again, we come up with the same answer. We're going to have $960 that we are going to add to profit. Again, if you use calculation 1 or 2, just double check it by using calculation number 3 or restating the contribution format income statement. And also as a presentation to management, you would probably want to do that.